So I believe we may continue to have a few people join, but I want to go ahead and start to welcome you. I am really excited to be part of this peer reviewer best practices mini workshop. So this is one of the workshops that we have discussed and designed through the SALURBAL Publications and Presentations Committee. And in this round, I'm really excited to be working with Firmino, and he will be helping to monitor the chat so that questions that come up, certainly if people in the room, I know there's a lot of experience here, if you want to go ahead and continue to interact with each other throughout the session via the chat, please do so. And I will rely on Firmino to bring to my attention anything that we need to discuss together as a group, any questions that may be outstanding and not getting enough attention. I think we are also going to set up a quick poll at the beginning of this session. Is that something you're able to do, Claire?
Yeah, it's all set up. Should I launch it now?
Yes, please go ahead and launch it. So even though we may continue to have people join us, I want to make sure we have some time for interaction during this session. So you should see on your screen the option to show your preference for which kind of breakout group you think would work well for our for us. So I think if you select in the first question, it's just, would you rather break out into groups based on language, type of journal, or at random? And then in the second, it is giving some information in case people want to break out by language group or type of journal so that we can get to some reasonable size groups. We are going to do that about at the halfway point so that we have some more chance for discussion. And Firmino is going to help us with setting up and naming those groups so that we can keep to a productive size. Usually, I think groups around 4 to 8 people work well. So thank you very much for your help with that. It looks like we have 13 out of 29 have voted, 14, 15. So thank you for getting your answers in. This will just help us to meet your preferences for how we can design these interactions. I know we are continuing to have people join. We now have 30 who are with us. And I want to thank everyone also who provided information in the survey ahead of time so that I could have a sense of your questions before launching in. Okay, I think we will just give 30 more seconds. So if you want to participate in this voting, go ahead and do so, and then we will close it out. I think the number of people joining and the number of people adding their votes is tapering off. So I'm going to go ahead and end polling. None of this binds you to, I hope you can now see the poll results. So you can choose what group to be in. We had, a most popular choice was to have type of journal factored into the groupings. Although there was some interest in the other options as well. And then we can see that there is possibly one group that might need to be split and maybe some groups that might need to be combined. Firmino's going to go ahead and operationalize that. So when we get to the midpoint, we're ready to invite you. And then you can choose which group to join.
Gina, I need to stop the share the results. Or Claire will do that.
Should I stop?
Share the results on the podium.
Is it showing now?
Yes.
Maybe you can grab a screenshot and then I will switch back to the slides. Okay. So I have a few slides that I want to talk us through, and I do encourage you to use the chat if you have questions that come up along the way, and we'll have a chance for more interaction during the breakout group in about the middle of the session. And as questions come up, Firmino will help to bring them to my attention if we need to pause and address them. It's been great to work together on planning this, so I definitely want to thank all the members of the P&P, but especially Firmino on help with envisioning and shaping this workshop. There are a couple of different types of reviews that we do internally for SALURBAL. So we have proposals that we review. Those are short, just to get the scope and the co-author team worked out for our different papers. And it's really helpful in looking at those to assess the title, whether that's specific enough to help us address overlap in the future. We do also do abstract reviews where we're looking at the audience interest and clear signaling of the stages of research, and certainly any addressable issues or things that would be problematic to move forward. But what I want to focus on today is the third kind of review that we do internally and that many of us do as well in our roles in service to the field, and that's the review of manuscripts. The length of manuscripts varies a lot, but these are generally longer than either the proposals or the abstracts, and we're often focused on whether internally, when we're reviewing for SALURBAL, whether the methods are clear, whether the acknowledgements are appropriate, and identifying ways that the references, tables and figures, text, and supplemental materials can be stronger. Across all of these, we want to think about where items are going, and in reviewing internally, and I think this applies as well for external peer review rules, we want to be purposeful rather than exhaustive in what we communicate back to the writing. So that will be definitely a recurrent theme. So focusing in on manuscripts, I want to now just give you a sense of where I want to go over the course of this session. I want to start with an overview of how to understand different types of reviews, and we can highlight a few pros and cons of the different types of reviews. We want to talk about what makes a peer review helpful and thinking about to whom different characteristics make a review helpful. We're going to go to our breakout group at that point to kind of elaborate on those thoughts, and then we're going to come back together to talk about the steps to complete a peer review and some of the nuts and bolts of getting to how to structure comments for the authors and what gets separately communicated to editors. Definitely welcome your questions throughout. I've looked at the questions that were submitted in advance, and so if you feel those haven't been addressed, definitely bring them up again in the chat. So the first thing that I wanted to share about the types of peer review, are you able to see the top of the slides, or is it blocked by this thing? Okay. I can never tell with the Zoom controls whether they're causing any problems for others. So a first way that we think about classifying models of peer review is by whose identity is known. So some of you may have worked on a manuscript submission where the journal requires you to take out the information about the author. So you're not putting into the author's submission, any names or institutions, and so it hides the identity of who's written this work. If that is accompanied by also keeping hidden the identity of the reviewer, then that's a double-blind review. This is a type of review that takes a little bit more work on the part of the reviewer because they don't have the ability to rely on the reputation of the author or their institution, but that's also the strength of this kind of review. It can reduce bias. There have been some experimental studies that show by doing double blinding, there's less bias in favor of famous author teams or very high reputation institutions. Most common, I think, are the single blind reviews, where the reviewer knows who wrote the paper, the title page information is included in the manuscript file, but the reviewer's name is not shared back to the authors. The authors just see it's reviewer 1, reviewer 2, reviewer 3, and they don't know who those individuals are. Interestingly, and I'm going to share an example of this latter type, open reviews are instances where it's known who the authors are, and it's known and named specifically who the reviewers are. I think some of the things that are good about this open review are that there's accountability and a sense of pride. I think by having your name signed to something, there may be closer attention to making sure that the review is really clear and well edited. On the other hand, one of the concerns people have about revealing the identity of reviewers is that there could be retribution. Somebody is critical and then that reviewer gets punished on the basis of having spoken out. There could be also comments that are not critical enough, that because the reviewer knows that their name is going to be identified and they don't want to make anyone in the field angry, they're actually too nice and don't raise important issues. Some other types to think about is an inefficiency if each journal reviews a paper and a paper goes through several journals and then each journal just starts over from scratch. So one of the trends has been to have transferable reviews where the comments from a previous review resulting in rejection get passed to a new journal. I've mostly experienced this within a family of journals. So journals that are associated with BMJ will pass along the comments. This is also labeled cascading or waterfall review, and it's really an attempt to keep the value from a review that's been conducted but resulted in rejection. It may have resulted in rejection because of a concern about fit with that journal, but they may contain addressable ideas for how to improve the work going forward. A second type that is interesting, and I'm going to share an example of this type, is a transparent review. So this is where the review comments themselves are part of the public record, and they are viewable along with the manuscript itself after publication. Finally, there are models of post-publication comments and even updates to the manuscript, which I think is an interesting challenge to the way we usually think about peer-reviewed literature. Using this latter idea of rapid publication and then allowing the article to be updated is the Welcome Open Trust publishing process that we have access to through SALURBAL because we're funded by Welcome Trust. So Welcome Open, gives an example of this, and it'll be interesting to see the uptake of this model and how it's viewed to have publications through Welcome Open Research. So what I want to do now is look at an example, and this is an example from the journal BMJ Open, and I chose this by looking specifically in BMJ Open because I knew they had a transparent open review. Usually, if I had in mind a paper where I was the reviewer, I couldn't share those materials because of confidentiality rules. And so by going to a transparent review, I can share a specific example. But we should keep in mind that transparent reviews may not be characteristic of all reviews. I think generally they are a bit nicer and a bit more edited than a typical review that you would encounter. I came to this specific article, which is looking at household water insecurity in a city in Mexico by just looking within BMJ Open for urban health Latin America in recent articles. So this is not not picked to have the features that I'm going to show you, but it turned out to be useful for illustrating some aspects of review. Just to have enough orientation to this article to understand the reviewer comments, a key part of it was using a new scale. So they have a 12-item scale, the HWIES scale that measures water insecurity. And I will show you what that looks like. And they were looking to understand the correlates with that scale. So this asks questions such as, how often did insufficient water supply affect washing clothes, how much you drank, what food you prepared, etc. And then it does have two subscales, one on the emotional consequences of water insecurity, feeling angry, ashamed, or worried, and another that's on the hygiene consequences of water insecurity. So just, again, to orient you to enough of this paper to understand the reviewer comments. The next table describes the household characteristics of the sample of 500 households. Another table looks at whether those characteristics are related to water insecurity. And then a series of subsequent tables look at how water insecurity is related to health outcomes, diarrheal, infectious, and stress related. To get at the full information about what reviewers said and how the authors responded, within any BMJ open article, you can go to article info. And then once you go into that, you just scroll down to where it says review history. And by clicking into review history, you get a full PDF. I've posted the PDF of the review history for this example in case you're interested, so that'll be available through our SALURBAL site. So in discussing with the P&P committee, we thought that having a concrete example might be useful for our discussion. I won't spend a lot more time on this, but I want to give you a bit of information on what the two reviewers said. So the first reviewer started with an acknowledgement of the importance of the topic and an assessment that it is overall appropriately executed, analyzed, and well written. They then went on to make some comments related to potential improvement. And finally, they suggested citing prior work that is of relevance. And if you click through, you find out that it is, in fact, something by this reviewer. And so I think it is a common, although not terribly well-regarded practice in reviews to request that your own work be cited. A second reviewer then went on a similar track. They first gave some comments about the importance of the topic and that they signaled that they thought the paper was important. And then they go on to make several suggestions for improvement. And I found these suggestions somewhat more actionable. They wanted to see variation by seasons. They had ideas about how to categorize this scale. And they also wanted to have some change in the discussion about how water insecurity was related to water quality. Finally, there was a potential error, a discrepancy pointed out that could be readily corrected and so was identified as a minor comment. And I think this general structure we'll come back to of summary and positive comments followed by major concerns, followed by minor concerns. I think that is a standard structure that works pretty well. So what I want to now get you to start thinking about, and Firmino, if you can go ahead and set up the breakout groups. Within breakout groups, I'd like you to talk about what are the characteristics that you would like to see in a review, what would make a review among the best, and what would be problematic, what would make a review less useful. And while you're thinking about that, I want to encourage you to think about different perspectives. So what is the writing team hoping to see? What does the editor want out of a good peer-reviewed report? What is of interest to the broader scientific community? So what do any of these perspectives see as desirable and undesirable characteristics of a peer review? Because I think that will help anchor our discussion of the steps to complete a review and other issues that arise. So when you're ready, we can go ahead and open the breakout rooms, and I want to just encourage you that we have a lot of experience across this group. So I'm really happy to hear a bit back from the groups, although what we're going to do is keep this to be a very short discussion and then request that somebody from each group report out through the chat after. So our plan is to have just under 10 minutes in the breakout groups. You should designate somebody who can take a few summary notes, and then they can put it into the chat. Firmino, are you able to start breakout groups?
Yes, I asked Claire to reorganize the groups, the rooms, because some people you will go just for one or there is just one or two people in a room. So we did 4 rooms that you can go into it, and the discussion will happen in there.
And I think if people click on the breakout rooms, they can choose the room they want to go into.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so if I go to more and then I go to breakout rooms, it gives me the choice of which room to join.
Okay.
And I will wait 8 minutes, and after we can end the breakup rooms. Yeah, okay.
So it looks like we have just 14 people left in the main room. If you go on the bottom of your screen where there's 3 dots to more, you should be able to join a breakout room.
Actually, hello, Gina. Actually, I can't. I don't have that option in my computer. I think the hosts are the ones who have those 3 dots with the breakout room option.
Okay,
which room do you want to go to? If you tell me, I can assign you.
Whatever. Any. It's okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Is anyone else having trouble?
The 3 dots either. Sorry, I can see the 3 dots and everything, but I don't know how to get to the room. Do I just click on it?
So if you tell me so there's 4 options, Ciencias Sociales y Diseño in Spanish, and then Clinical and Health Journals in Spanish, and then the same in English. So we're splitting the discussion by language. Do you need me to assign you to a room, Priscilla?
Yes. Either the English one or the Spanish ones is fine.
Do you prefer social science or clinical?
Yes, social science.
Social science? Okay.
Hi, Claire, do you mind assigning to a room, please, too? To social science, if possible?
Mm-hmm. I'm kind of worried. I see that Mika, who does not speak Spanish, is in the Spanish room. So I think I'm going to join and make sure she's okay. And
okay, sounds good. I'm planning to stay in this room, and that way if anybody pops in late and they don't know what's going on, I'm here.
Okay, sounds good.
Welcome back. So we are waiting for more to rejoin us from the breakout rooms. But for those who've already come back, if you have someone designated in your group to share thoughts on what is the best or worst characteristics of a peer review, you can go ahead and share those into the chat. Okay, so I think we may have a few others join us, but I believe we are starting to reassemble and giving a chance for some share out from the groups. I see some desirable characteristics, an appreciative perspective, understanding the aims of the article, specific and clear instructions, clarify the message for the wider audience. So these are so far substantive and constructive comments. Clarify the message for external audiences, translation for policymakers. On the worst side, we're seeing comments about limiting your discussion in ways that the author team doesn't agree with, or extreme literature, loose, unclear instructions, being snide, disrespectful, cynical, sarcastic. So I think these comments, including the ones just coming in from author and editor perspective, they really highlight the need for attention to tone, for attention to editing, for attention to being purposeful and realizing that the role of the reviewer is not to rethink the whole paper in how they would have done it, but is really to anchor a criticism and commentary about, what's valid in this work, why should it be published, why should it be published now, who is it speaking to, who's the audience. I think in addition to some of the topics, I did want us to think about reviews that happen quickly or on time, serve the interests of actually the writing team, the editor, and the scientific community, making sure that peer review isn't adding to delay. And some of the extremes on the worst side, even worse than unclear comments, would be going all the way to unethical practices. I think in reading about where peer review gets misused, reviews that are not done with integrity, reviews that are done by editors registering as reviewers to expedite the process, reviews that are slowed down in order to keep a paper from being published by a competitor. Yeah, and the comment that's coming through about conflicts of interest, you know, really anything that is serving the interests of the reviewer and responding to animosities, any, you know, personal conflicts that they may have, probably is not serving the interests of the scientific community and is likely to be unwelcome by both the writing team and the editor. So there's a resource below that also I think is helpful in thinking about some of the ethical issues around roles and responsibilities in the context of peer review. I know for several of you, there was an interest in what do the steps to complete a peer review look like. And I think in the coming slides, I've got a few resources. These slides will be available to you through the SALURBAL internal site. We'll make sure you know how to find them. So I've got several references embedded for further reading. For the steps, I think the first step, and this was really emphasized in our P&P discussions as needing a good bit of attention, is deciding whether you can and should review a given article. The link here is to a booklet that has a nice decision tree type tool for deciding whether you can and should review, and thinking about a range of considerations, you know, beyond whether you have time to review and whether it's of interest, considering even things like the publication model, whether you're comfortable with the publication process that you're a part of. So if you decide that you are going to proceed with reviewing, making sure that you have time to read, review, and edit will help with issues like meeting the deadlines and meeting those interests of the author and editorial teams that we've been talking about, where you really want to be showing judgment in which comments you highlight. So this generally means not just reading and making comments and sending all those comments in, but taking a first read that helps you get context and then decide and make judgments about which comments are sufficiently important to raise. And then you may be able to consolidate so that you're not switching topics throughout your review, but you really have, you know, here are a set of comments that are around this issue. And that may help the writing team to take that and move forward with the improvement to the manuscript. Likewise, curating minor comments, it's not usually appropriate to have pages and pages of grammatical and punctuation checks. You want to be realizing that your role as a reviewer is substantive, and that should be the focus of your attention. I do think an area of active discussion is whether supplemental materials are subject to the same peer review as other materials. In the example I showed, they do have supplemental materials, but they're pretty clearly marked as being outside of the peer review process. They're available to reviewers as they're assessing the work, but they're not sort of stamped as peer reviewed in the same way that the main manuscript is. So whether or not you decide to review the supplemental materials, you do need at the end of the day to recommend a decision. I particularly liked this resource that had a list of common reasons for recommending rejection. I think it's useful if you're on the borderline of making that recommendation to think about, you know, what is really the basis for it. It can be anything from concerns about fit to the journal, concerns about the validity of the science, to concerns about whether the work is being appropriately represented and is sufficiently clear. A couple of other notes as we think about structuring the comments to the authors. To me, I've mentioned already this structure of giving some positive reflections an initial summary at the top, followed by major problems or issues presented in a consolidated way. I would say that those major comments, it's useful to think about them as having two parts. Often there is a piece that is a diagnosis. I see the paper has this problem. And there's a piece that is a prescription. I think you should do this instead. Giving both of those clearly helps the author team to see if they agree that that is really an issue. And if they agree with the issue, they may still have a different idea for a solution that addresses that issue. So they may be able to respond and say, yes, you brought up an important issue. While you suggested this solution, we have another idea, and that's what we've implemented. Having minor comments, to me, the amount of time that you spend on those should be calibrated based on what your decision is ultimately going to be. A paper that is going to be recommended for rejection, it may not be useful to give a lot of minor comments because there may need to be some major restructuring or reorganization for a new journal. So just being thoughtful about what's the right amount. I often find that very positive and very negative reviews are shorter than the reviews that are in the middle, where you're likely to be recommending a revision and you want to give clear guidance to that revision. Usually, both in our internal process and in working with a journal, there is an opportunity to communicate some thoughts that don't go to the author team. And so I thought I would just share in that context, some of the things that are useful to comment on are if you have any relationships, financial or otherwise, that could be perceived as a conflict. This is a good place to disclose those. If you've done something that is non-standard, such as worked with a trainee on a review, my practice has been to get permission from the editorial team first, because confidentiality agreements usually say that you should not share the manuscript that you're reviewing. But if I've gotten permission first, then I will share in my comments to editors just a reminder that I've done this as a mentored review. And then finally, any limits to expertise. I often see people say, that they didn't feel they had the expertise to evaluate the statistical basis for this work, but, they thought if it moved forward, it would need further review. Certainly, if there are any process concerns or suggestions, this is a good place to raise them. And if you have a borderline recommendation where the editor might see your comments and your recommendation and wonder if they're in alignment, this can be a good space to give context for that. You may say, I've got a lot of concerns, but I ultimately think they're addressable, and so that's why I decided on a major revision rather than a rejection. So you can help the editor to make sense of what may seem to be misalignment or, imperfect agreement between your comments and your recommendation. I think this tends to be a pretty negative communication because it is about raising concerns and conflicts. But if there's something that you're happy to see in the process, I'm sure that editors and certainly P&P also are appreciative of and pleasantly surprised by such notes. So a final thought, and I think that this is particularly sensitive and may merit some discussion. How do we reward reviewers? How do we recognize their time? And so because there was some interest in looking at for-profit journals versus other models of journals, one of the concerns about for-profit journals is that they could be profiting basically on the value that's created by author teams and by peer reviewers. And so should part of those profits be used then to pay peer reviewers? Currently, models are to make service visible through thank yous that are published by the journal. We thank this set of reviewers who provided service in the last year, to make it visible through tools like Publons, to be rewarded in kind through some credit towards future publication at that same journal. But some events that have had thoughtful discussion about the pros and cons of paying reviewers have found that that a number of concerns about gaming the system come forward. That I had read about a workshop where people came in closer to evenly split between being in favor of or against paying reviewers, and then after discussion, bringing up points from both sides, there was more concern that paying reviewers could lead to a bias in favor of publishing, a bias towards, accepting for review articles that are outside of one's expertise. So I don't think we have fully solved how to recognize reviewers' service. But I think many people feel more comfortable with offering that service on a voluntary basis for journals that are managed by a professional society rather than journals that are for-profit. I do want to point you to this resource that I found really thoughtful and interesting about peer review. It has quotes from editors embedded throughout, and a section I really like, peer review, warts and all. So really looking at what peer review does for the scientific community and where it may not be sufficient to catch potential problems and errors as they emerge. That is what I wanted to share with you, and I am happy that we have a few minutes left here at the end for questions. So if you have questions that you would like to raise or things you'd like to hear more about, this would be a great time to put those into the chat. Thank you very much. While people think about questions that may be outstanding, I'd like to invite if anyone from the P&P committee wants to add to what's been shared or add about your own practice in peer review or in supporting others in peer review.
Hi, Gina, this is Mariana. This was excellent, and I really don't have anything to add. There was one thing, but you mentioned it. I think it was very comprehensive and thorough review of the process from the different perspectives. The one thing that I discussed within my group was what to do with very bad articles, no? And from the point of view of being asked to review. But I'm glad you mentioned about the need to calibrate a little bit the amount of time that we spend sometimes with those articles. And your point about, okay, just to identify the fatal flaw, and that's it. But other than that, I think it was a wonderful review of the process.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you for shaping the conversation. I know one of the things that was brought up as a point of curiosity in advance was how long does it take to do a peer review, or how long should it take? And I wanted to reflect back on that in two ways. So it should be different based on the paper. Some papers will take longer because they're further outside of your expertise, because they're more complicated, because they're just actually longer, more pages of text. So I wouldn't expect this to be uniform even within an individual. One of the pieces of advice that I found really helpful is to kind of turn this without judgment to a practice of observing yourself. So if you're wondering how long it takes you to review a paper, then the next time you have an opportunity to review a paper, write out what the tasks are, estimate how much time each will take, and then observe whether your estimates are correct. And then you can gradually, through a kind of reflective practice, start to update how long it takes. I can say that for me, I know that reading the paper before I start really taking comments down, it's quite variable how well oriented I can get to the paper right away. And so I think that's probably an hour on average. But in some cases, it's very familiar. I mean, already know the study context and I can go faster. And in other cases, I really have to get my head around the paper and it can take longer. So I think the stage of drafting comments is probably another hour generally. But if people have estimates of how long it's taken them to do peer review, then maybe we can get some collective wisdom on that. So my estimate is that about 2 hours before I start trying to edit and get it smoothed out, so it probably gets me to 3 hours by the end, once you factor in correspondence with the journal and other aspects of the work. But that's after doing this many, many times, having a kind of formula to how I do the review.
Hi, Gina. Thank you very much for the presentation. Very clear and helpful, I think, for everybody. I think it's very comprehensive, but I do want you to comment about when you have an editor who likes the paper, and you can see in the comments of his or her comment that it's a very welcome paper to be submitted again. But when you see the reviewers, you at least sometimes 3, 4, 5, I think now it's getting more and more, and you see conflicted opinions about the paper. And what do you recommend in terms of reviewing a paper as an author or co-author or whatever, team writing?
So I think editors are responding to the fact that the number of requests they have to send out to get one reviewer has gone up. And so in some cases, they have gone ahead and requested 4 reviews before they get any answers of no. And if they all happen to say yes, then you can have what seems like too many voices in the review process. Realizing we're very short on time, I will say that as an author responding to reviewer comments, my strategy is to number the comments so that if a third reviewer is bringing up the same issue, I can just point back to the first place I responded to it and say, I responded to reviewer 1's third comment, please see my response there. And I can, in one place, discuss that, this is a controversial issue, we got advice on both sides, we decided to do this. So that you can try to consolidate where there's some difference. Oh. Yes.
No, good. If I can add just a couple of two quick things. One is for students or those of you more junior, ask the people you're working with and express interest in starting to do reviews of papers. It's very useful, and as Gina pointed out, it's commonly done, and we acknowledge your contribution to the review, and it's a good way to get started. And the other thing is that I've encountered is sometimes they ask me to review papers and for one particular area of expertise, but the paper, I may not be 100% familiar with methods. So feel free, it's okay to say, I defer comments of those, specific methods or to the editorial team. My comments are focused on this, which is, the area that I'm more familiar with. So that's something that I've done.
I think that's I'd like to add that Mariana said, because it's a very interesting progress that you see when you see your students doing the review with you. And one thing that I'd like to point, Mariana, is that sometimes you don't have a place in the review process where you can add the name of the student or the junior person. So at least, you know, to the comment or to the editor or whatever, wherever we have a box, you should say, okay, I have someone who helped me that, and he's my master, my doctoral student. I think this is very interesting. But some journals, they do have a special place where you can add that. But most of them, if I'm correct, they don't have a special place for that. Thank you, Mariana, for that.
That's right. And I want to recognize everyone's time. Thank everyone who was able to join us, and invite that if you have further questions that you think P&P can help you to sort out, you're welcome to reach out to me directly, and we will do our best to find other ways to communicate out and share what we're learning, resources that we're finding that we think might be helpful to you all. So thank you very much.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.